Welcome back. This is Within Reason with Bob Kerrigan and Bill Rankin. Bob is away. I'm Bill Rankin, and with me is Dr. Jocelyn Evans, who is a professor at UWF, the head of the Department of Government. She's written a couple of books. We didn't mention the first book. What's the first book?
The first book is Women, Partisanship, and the U.S. Congress, and it's about partisanship and gender, how women in the Democratic Party experience politics different from women in the Republican Party. Which
I guess could be a whole other visit if you're willing to do it.
If you're willing to put up with me.
Okay. But we've been talking about, we started with what happened to Congress in 9/11, and it was really more severe than I thought, and to this day, you almost, well, it's difficult and cumbersome and not very effective to send regular snail mail letters to your senators and representatives. And then we started talking about the visitor center, which opened when? This is if you wanted to visit your capital, you have to go through the visitor center.
It opened at the very end of 2008. And one of the interesting things we were talking about earlier is the initial estimates put it at about $70 million to build. But with all of the security changes that were needed post 9/11 and using it as an opportunity to add all kinds of things while they were at it, it ultimately exploded to costing over $600 million. It's about 10 times as expensive.
Only in government do you find things like that. How big is it? Do you remember how many square feet? It's in your book.
It's about 3/4 the size of the Capitol itself.
The whole Capitol?
The whole Capitol, yes. And it's built underground.
All underground, which of course costs a lot.
There's a whole floor that the public can't access. I had the opportunity to get down there with the U.S. Capitol historian. He took me down there because of the book project.
Cool.
And there is actually an alternative legislative chamber down there, so that if we were under attack and Congress needed to meet, they wouldn't do so on the Capitol steps singing God Bless America, but they'd actually go underground.
I keep thinking of Dr. Strangelove when we start talking about this stuff. So it's this monstrous underground space, and well, you certainly need to screen people going into the Capitol. I don't think anybody would dispute that. So it serves that function.
Right.
When you visit, you don't. If you're waiting, you're not waiting out of doors, except you're waiting underground. Now, if you want to see the House or the Senate in session, what's that like? Is it different?
The process is completely changed. So before, you would go through your member's office, and probably an intern would take you on a tour. But it was really neat because you could go through the tunnel from the House over to the Capitol.
I mean, did you have to be a big shot or just a constituent?
Just a constituent. As long as you were with someone who had a pass, who had a staff pass, you could get to all different kinds of spaces in the Capitol. They would take you through the rotunda.
That would be
through
neat.
the old,
your own private tour, and you don't have to be the biggest contributor. You could just say, I'm a constituent, and I made a trip to Washington with my kids, and I'd sure appreciated it.
That's right. That was part of your member's job. Now, all visitors are screened through the Capitol Visitor Center, and you sign up for a tour time, and they have tour guides who are professionally trained who take you in groups of about 15 to 20 through the various spaces.
Oh, that's not so bad.
Doesn't sound so bad, except it's not on your time, it's on their time.
Yeah, of course.
So, you know, depending on where you line up in the queue, you can get in a good space in Statuary Hall or a bad space. So my beef is that I like to spend a lot of time in the rotunda. I like to walk around and look at all of the huge paintings.
And you have to stay with the group.
You have to stay with the group.
You must stay with the group or you get yelled at.
That's right. And you don't get to see all the same spaces. You don't necessarily get to see the old Supreme Court chamber. It all depends on how crowded it is and how much of a time constraint you're under.
Do you see the body in session?
If you go to your member's office and get gallery passes.
Oh, I see.
But you don't know
so
that.
So even if they're in session, you might expect to see the session going on.
Right.
Of course, if you watch C-SPAN at all, it's a lot
You've
of
seen
times
enough.
there's somebody standing there making a big speech and nobody in the chamber is listening at all.
That's true. But one of the wonderful things about seeing it in person is to see how intimate the chamber is.
Yeah, the Senate.
Yeah, it's so small.
Yeah. That's neat.
You can hear them talking. So, you know, I hate to think that visitors will go and just see various museum-type spaces and not actually witness Congress in session.
But what's the alternative?
Well,
I mean, can you fault him for doing it that way?
I guess in my mind, if terrorists were going to bomb the Capitol, can they not still do that?
Well,
I don't
yeah,
know.
certainly. I mean, if you're going to fly an airplane into the Capitol, none of this makes the slightest bit of difference. But
you know, we had metal detectors. You already were limited in terms of what you could take
Yeah.
into,
Yeah.
you know, the chamber. I just worry. We had made it so many centuries and had some pretty significant attacks, but somehow managed to keep that
Yeah.
balance.
But some of it was crazy. I mean, I know that while Lincoln was president, and the people in the South reviled him. I mean, they'd have been happy to kill him.
That's right.
And just any stray drunk could wander in and walk into the White House, and they really had strangers, and sometimes drunk, sleeping in the halls.
They did, but we actually also used it for wounded soldiers during the Civil War. The space it has such a rich history.
Different. I'm kind of, you got to be kind of surprised Lincoln made it to the end of the war.
It's true.
Yeah. And if you're interested in doing this, and I suspect a lot of people are, I mean, isn't kind of a tradition. Sometime during middle school or high school, you make the Washington trip and you see the Lincoln Memorial and the Jefferson Monument, and you see all this stuff. Is it the full TSA deal with your shoes off and?
No, I don't think you have to take your shoes off, but you can hardly take anything in. So. And they just they're pretty strict. They don't let you get anywhere close to actual members. So really, you're talking about seeing the rotunda, seeing.
But if you contact your member in advance,
yes,
you can. Can you
can
actually
get
talk to the
gallery
member that way?
passes, and you can set up a meeting to visit with your member
in his or her office.
Yes.
Good.
Yes,
okay.
and members actually have started this practice of having a morning brunch for constituents. So if you're coming to D.C., they'll say, well, come to our Tuesday morning brunch with the member. It's a way of having more meetings, you know, killing more birds with one stone.
Yeah, well, of course. I mean, Congress is pretty much reviled. When they do polls, it's 9 or 10%. I've often wondered who are those 9 or 10%, because the way business is done is really kind of buying influence and buying legislation that makes no sense otherwise. But they're certainly very busy people, aren't they?
They are very busy, and you know, a lot of people say, I mean, just look at how much money they make. The truth is, they make a lot more money in the private sector in their jobs that they had before they ran for Congress. And the typical member keeps up 2 residences, one in D.C. and one back home in the district.
There are ways they all wind up rich, though. You know, I mean, they just wind up making the proper. Well, Steny Hoyer. I read in Peter Schweitzer's book, he and some associates bought a big block of land, and then they kind of sponsored some kind of a big federal parkway through there, which made the land much more valuable than they sold it.
Right.
And that kind of goes on.
That happens.
Joe Biden, who brags about how impecunious he is, and I guess by congressional and Senate standards he is, but his son ran a lobbying group. And when Dickie Scruggs, the lawyer kind of behind all the tobacco litigation, wanted to get some influence, he hired Joe Biden's son. And, I mean, you know, so there are ways. I suppose we don't have, except in Escambia County, the briefcase is full of cash anymore. But there are certainly ways to reward the people around your elected representative and perhaps have some influence on legislation.
I always try to remind my students that the size of the average congressional district now is 700,000 people. And if you were going to choose one person to go to Congress to represent you out of 700,000 people, how wealthy would that person be?
Yeah.
And when you put it in those terms, when you look around your community and you pinpoint who would I want to be there, it's interesting how small that circle of possibilities is.
Yeah. And you're not going to get elected to the Congress, and certainly not the Senate, without a lot of supporters and a lot of money. Nobody knows. I do, because it's the kind of thing I'm interested in. But I've asked people who are really smart, smarter than me, and really plugged in, who the Libertarian candidate is for Jeff Miller's seat.
Don't ask me.
Nobody knows. Well, how would you know?
Right.
I mean, there hasn't been TV, there haven't been newspaper ads, unless you can get on this gentleman's website and get on his email list. You're not going to know, because there's just, you can look it up.
That's right.
If you happen to think, well, maybe there's a Libertarian candidate, which there isn't always. Kaylin Fretz And I really like his website. He's a smart young guy, and he makes a lot of sense to me. His chances of being elected are zero. Absolutely zero. Nobody's heard of him.
Right.
How are they going to vote for him?
Right. There's a lot of issues there. I mean, there's a role of name recognition and the role of money, but there's also systemic issues. I mean, we have single-member districts.
Right.
Right? So only one person will be elected. It's winner take all. So we don't have proportional representation like other countries do.
Oh, that's something we could talk about.
It is. It is. There are plenty of things built into the system that leads to two-party system. Right. Incumbency advantage.
Absolutely. Yeah. And would you rather see a change in that? I mean, my own view is that with the two-party system, with what we've got going on now, bringing home the pork and everything tended toward more and more government expenditures, I'd like to see some kind of change. I'm not much for willy-nilly changing the Constitution, but even a parliamentary system, it isn't working, in my view, at the national level. It is not working. They do crazy things that make sense only in terms of party interests, their own interests, and bringing home the pork. For example, when somebody's district doesn't get the airplane that the Air Force needs, they don't care about the airplane. They'll raise a big fuss and stall the whole project to try to get it in their district. Well, so we've got each of the districts, in essence, trying to steal from each other.
That's true, or fighting against each other. I mean, you can see it as stealing, but you can also look at it if you have geographically based districts and one member per district. They're all going to D.C. to represent the interests of that district.
They are indeed.
So after Hurricane Ivan, our bridges are all messed up. Right. Well, our members there saying, we need new bridges.
Yeah.
Well, member over there saying, Jeff Miller's trying to bring a bridge back home to the district.
Yeah.
Doggone straight he is.
And you can see why people want to vote for somebody with some seniority. I mean,
and who brings stuff back home.
Of course. I mean, you get the chairman of House Appropriations or something, and they're going to bring back bundles of pork. I mean, they'll just build all kinds of stuff at federal expense, whether it makes any sense or not,
Well,
which would be great for Pensacola. We need the business. I mean, it's a difficult thing. And if Mr. Fretz gets up there, not likely. I'm going to vote for him. He's going to have no seniority. He's going to have no party structure.
That's right.
He
won't get any committee assignments because he didn't run under the banner of one of the two parties.
You mean he could be on no committees?
Absolutely. The party leadership, the committee system is not in the Constitution.
Right.
It's something that was developed by Congress after parties were established to help organize business.
Yeah.
One of the things you mentioned was, wouldn't it be better to go to proportional representation? What would happen then is that we really would have more of a party-based system.
Which wouldn't necessarily be good.
I mean, do people want the candidate, individual members of Congress to have more power, or do they want political parties to have more power?
Yeah, the political parties already have, I think, way too much.
But a proportional system would allocate seats based on the percent of the vote that the party received.
That the party got. So you're basically voting for the party.
You're voting for the party.
Yeah.
So we would probably see more parties, but they'd probably be more ideological because there'd be more of them. So they could
and you see that in other countries.
You do, absolutely.
Yeah. Extreme parties. But they need to put them in a coalition in order to form a government, which they do
to get things done.
Other systems.
And that's why we also formed a two-party system, is because we didn't have parties. We had all these various interests, and we couldn't build a coalition. So, our founding fathers disparaged parties.
They didn't like them.
But by the time we got to the Jacksonian era, government, we couldn't get anything done. So that's really the birth of the two-party system.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And Jacksonians what, 1820?
That's 1820s.
Okay.
So there was just too much infighting. If you aren't against each other, if you don't have this kind of fight going on, then you're just internally divided.
And the parties have gotten themselves. I mean, if you're the nominee of one of the parties, you're on the ballot. I mean, it's.
Well, that's a whole nother discussion.
Yeah.
Competition, party competition.
The party system. Yeah. Well, why did I don't know if you knew this or not? If the founding fathers, didn't they call them factions?
Yes.
They didn't. They just they didn't want people to form factions.
That's
why,
right.
Why not? What's the reason not to have? Which is, they did. I mean, the founding fathers, it didn't turn out the way they wanted, because we certainly have factions.
Well, Madison was a big opponent of factions. And opponent's maybe the wrong word. He thought that factions were natural. A faction is anybody united behind a common interest.
You form together and
so you're going to have interest groups.
Of course.
That's part of human nature. And in a free society, interest groups will proliferate. I can't tell you what to think and make you think it.
Exactly.
I can't give everybody the same opinion. So Madison saw that in a free society, interest groups would happen. The best way to control them was to actually multiply the number of interests. So he was arguing for a federal system. He didn't want individual states to have a lot of power. He wanted a big federal government so that you would have all these different factions, states, interest groups competing against one another, and no one of them would accumulate too much power.
But he was in a minority in that. I mean, our government is designed by people who feared central government. They weren't crazy about King George, which is why this country got started.
That's true, but at the time that Madison was fighting for the Constitution, they were afraid of populism. They were afraid of the people, the 99%.
Of course.
Coming after the rich, which Madison was part of.
Which is why we they didn't create a system of direct election of senators.
That's right. Madison didn't want all of the 99% to come after him as a majority faction and take away his stuff. Definitely these same financial kind of interests have been present since the founding and defined American politics.
So your take is it's pretty much inevitable that interest groups, whatever you're going to call them, are going to be formed.
Yes, and that there will be the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah. You know, when we come back, we're going to take a break in a short period of time, but when we come back, I would love to talk about populism, the Occupy, because there seems to me to have been kind of a resurgence of populism. Can we do that?
Absolutely.
Okay. Stay with us. Our guest is going to be Dr. Jocelyn Evans for the entire show. And if you stay tuned, we'll be back and talk about some pretty current stuff. Be right back.